The core framework of Christian theology operates on a specific, stated promise. In John 10:10, the architect defines the intended output of the entire system as abundant life, a state characterized by freedom and vitality. Yet for many modern believers, the lived experience looks significantly different. They report a chronic accumulation of guilt, a constant need for self-censorship, and a persistent underlying anxiety regarding divine judgment. Even those most committed to the faith find themselves carrying heavy, unresolved questions. They worry if they have believed enough, if their past is truly erased, or if they are perpetually failing to meet an impossible standard. This creates an architectural error. The specified input, the promise of abundant life, processed through the modern church, yields metrics of guilt and flaw. This weight acts like an invisible backpack. Data shows more energy invested, the heavier the psychological load. If a system consistently produces results that contradicts its own blueprint, the problem likely lies in a legacy protocol hidden deep within the code. Dr. Reo Kim spent 55 years analyzing this contradiction. As a physicist, an engineer, and a lifelong member of the faith, he occupied the narrow intersection between empirical observation and theological tradition. He lived between two conflicting demands. In the laboratory, he required measurable, repeatable data. In church, he was told that questioning the established doctrine was a sign of failing faith. When he applied the same diagnostic rigor used in physics to the history of theology, he realized that science and faith were not competing forces. They were two different languages mapping the same reality. Looking at the 5th century historical record, he identified a massive shift in how the faith was structured, a defensive, high-control protocol he calls Fear OS. To remove the weight of that invisible backpack, we have to decompile this historical codebase and see exactly when this Fear OS was installed. In the 5th century, the Roman Empire was undergoing a total institutional collapse. As the old political structures dissolved into chaos, the early church became the primary source of social stability. To prevent total societal disintegration, theologians needed a narrative that would enforce order and compliance among a terrified population. This period saw the formalization of original sin. Framing human nature as fatally flawed from birth, this emergency patch provided a moral framework people were too afraid to break, substituting disappearing Roman law with the fear of eternal judgment. At the time, this was a necessary survival strategy. It held the Western world together during its darkest centuries. But after the crisis passed, this emergency patch remained in the core code. It has been running, unmodified, for 1,600 years. Running 5th century defensive code in the modern era creates a severe bottleneck. It forces us to view ourselves through a lens of deficiency that no longer matches what we know about the universe. The invisible backpack is the accumulated technical debt of a collapsed empire's survival plan. A modern system upgrade requires looking at the original hardware specifications, the physical data of the universe itself. Our existence was preceded by 13.8 billion years of stellar nucleosynthesis and evolution, a precise process required to forge the heavy elements that make life possible. This timeline converges on a specific result: the biological complexity of a human being. If the universe invested billions of years refining the conditions for our consciousness, then the theological concept of imago Dei takes on a physical weight. It suggests we carry the DNA of that divine effort. This empirical perspective challenges the Fear OS narrative. It is illogical to suggest an architect would spend billions of years refining a system only to declare it fundamentally broken the moment it finished. The cosmic data points to a design intended for autonomy and growth, not for a life lived in a state of perpetual self-censorship. Acknowledging our 13.8 billion year physical pedigree shifts the baseline assumption from inherent deficiency to inherent value. This brings us to the interpretation of the tree of knowledge. Legacy theology often frames it as a trap designed to trigger a downfall. However, a system based on forced, pre-programmed obedience has no capacity for real relationship. Genuine connection requires the possibility of rejection. Without the variable of free will, the concept of love cannot exist. The tree of knowledge functions as a growth protocol. It represents the transition from automated innocence to conscious choice. It is the specific mechanism required to introduce free will into the system. The ability to choose against a directive is what gives the choice for that directive its value. You cannot truly choose love if you do not have the capacity to choose something else. The first act of autonomy was not a system failure. It was the difficult, necessary step toward becoming a being capable of authentic relationship. The mechanism previously blamed for our guilt is actually the catalyst for our capacity to love. Finally, we must address the mapping of Eden and heaven. We often treat them as distant locations, one lost in the past and one waiting after death. This is a perspective error. Eden was never a physical coordinate on a map. It is an operating frequency. Eden is a spatio-temporal reality. It is a state of alignment that exists in the present, overlaid on our current coordinates. We can apply the same correction to heaven. The original Greek texts do not describe it as a destination reached only after the body fails. The term metabebekin indicates that those who align with love have already crossed over. It describes an action already occurring in the present tense. When we remove the boundaries of the lost past and the distant future, the entire focus of the faith shifts to the immediate present. By identifying these historical errors, we can delete the 1,600-year-old technical debt of Fear OS. We can initiate a system reboot where observations of astrophysics and the core intent of theology align. The upgraded system rests on 3 pillars. Eden is a present perspective, humanity is the intentional result of the cosmos, and autonomy is the requirement for love. This is Love OS, operating under the directive of Sola Amore, love alone. Love OS prioritizes the expansion of connection and growth over the legacy protocol of managing guilt and avoiding punishment. When a system is built on the pursuit of connection rather than the avoidance of shame, the resulting environment naturally aligns with the abundant life described in the original blueprints. This brings us back to you and that invisible backpack of guilt and exhaustion you've been carrying. Data from the cosmos and the early layers of the text point to the same conclusion. That burden was added by human hands, not the architect. You have permission, grounded in the history of the text and the reality of the universe, to put that backpack down. The legacy code has been patched. You are invited to stop managing a defensive system and begin living the 6th day of creation in freedom.